Well, thank you everyone for joining. As I said, my name is Dave Hagenbarth and I'm the VP of Systems Engineering here at Pliant. And today I want to take you through a journey of Pliant and ServiceNow. This is going to be a fairly short webinar. I'm going to do a couple slides to set the stage on who Pliant is and how we approach low-code, no-code automation. I'm going to walk you through a couple use cases in the slides, and then I'm going to actually do those use cases in our UI. All live. In the bottom right, top left, depending on how you're set up in Zoom, there is a Q&A panel. If you have any questions, please type your questions in there and I will try to answer them. I'm joined as well by Luke Lim on my team. And if I can't answer them, I'm sure Luke can. So with that, I'm going to get started. So what is Pliant? Pliant is a platform that allows you to do low-code integration and workflow automation with a lot of different infrastructure vendors. Now, Pliant's capabilities could extend far beyond the infrastructure. We're basically creating what we call action blocks, and I'll show you that in a second, from manufacturers' APIs. And so that doesn't limit us to the infrastructure, but we felt like the infrastructure world was vastly underserved. And there's a big challenge coming between new infrastructure automation or new infrastructure gear that allows you to do automation with APIs and a lot of the skill set around running the infrastructure via APIs. Three pillars around Pliant. The ability to automate, and I'll talk a lot more about that. The ability to automate from a secure platform, and I'll talk about how we separate passwords from our actual work flow creation, and the ability to transform. And transform for us has a couple different meanings. Transform could be data sets from one platform to another, and I'll show you some of those workflows. Transform could just be the way you go out automating things in your infrastructure and environment. So really the challenge that we're addressing is on the left, we have infrastructure. A whole lot of new infrastructures coming with APIs. There are a lot of infrastructure folks out there who have been working with the infrastructure one-on-one, meaning we SSH or we go to the command line and we run a series of commands and we move on to the next device, or we use a web UI. Even sometimes in the case of wireless, like Aruba, we have a controller, and that's great, right? So we can configure a lot of things at once from the controller, but we're still in the wireless silo. So how do we tie that all together? Well, there's a vast number of APIs to be used, but a lot of times that takes a programming skill. So on the right, we have a set of developers. Maybe they're your DevOps guys. We're going to talk about ServiceNow today. There's your ServiceNow developers, right? And they're great at running code, but they always have to go, well, what now? How do I do that? Why, when a wireless access point goes down, why is reboot something we want to do? They don't understand the world of infrastructure, but they understand the world of coding really well. So really where we see Pliant is we're sitting in the middle of that. We're going to give you a UI that's drag and drop, easy to use, so that a term I saw this week, citizen developer, right? You can begin to develop or use the APIs that you purchased with the infrastructure gear that you got to really automate and transform how you do things. And this slide really gets to the essence of what Pliant does. So on the left, what you see is some code that you would use to actually create an incident in ServiceNow. So I could write this in Node.js, or I could pull out Python, or I can pull out whatever language I really want, and I can interact with ServiceNow. But there are a lot of us out there who weren't really into writing code. But now all of a sudden we have to write code because we really need this automation to keep up with the changes in our business. Well, what Pliant does is we go out to these vendors and we get all the different API calls that they have, and we build what we call action blocks, or this square on the right. So an action block is the API call we want to do to perform some sort of action, like create an incident or resolve an incident, whatever it might be. But we've boiled all this code into a drag and drop block. So the green dots really, I want to call out a couple things. One, the green dot around var instance, right? Where are we going? Well, we've taken all the parameters and we've put them into fields that are easy to use. The other green dot here with the key represents the authentication. So I talked a little bit about automate, secure, and transform. In the world of secure, Pliant has the ability to separate authentication from script building, as I mentioned before. And the way we do that is we allow the admins to actually put in the authentication that you would need to interact with ServiceNow and create this tag. And what you see in my picture on the right, demo/ServiceNow, blah, 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 that's a tag. You don't actually have any idea how to get back to that ServiceNow instance. You don't know how or what the admin credentials or whatever credentials we use to do this are. All you know is that you've been given these credentials to go ahead and build out a workflow. And your workflow will run because you've been given the proper credentials, but you don't have access to the broader ServiceNow. So I could actually this could be admin credentials, but you can't get to the HTTP interface or the HTTPS interface, and you can't, go in and do other things, right? I've given you the ability to create an incident in this particular case. So really that's the backdrop of Pliant. We're building these action blocks. What we've done is, and you'll see in a couple slides from now, we're going through manufacturers a couple of weeks. We're building out all these new integrations that you can use. Just so happens ServiceNow is one of the integrations that we've built. And where we see ourselves really is, as I mentioned before, playing in the infrastructure space. So Pliant is a tool that allows you to easily automate infrastructure vendors, whether they're security-based like F5, Fortinet, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, whether they're infrastructure like load balancing, A10, A5, VMware, creating virtual machines, which I'll show you in a little bit, Arista, Microsoft, and on and on. We have the ability to programmatically interact with many, many different systems. And if there's a manufacturer out there that you don't, Pliant does not have an integration for today, for our customers, we're offering a 15 business day SLA to take that manufacturer's API and create the action blocks that you're going to see me use in just a minute. So here's a little bigger list of our integration. Out on our website, www.pliant.io. Is a complete list of the integrations, but here you see a sort of a matrix of some of the ones that we've done. This is about enough to fill one slide. As I mentioned, there are more, but these are the different manufacturers that we've gone out and integrated the action blocks with. And I'm going to show you now exactly how that works. But first I thought I would just mention a little bit about the Pliant platform. Again, I'm not trying to make this training, just to give you a high-level overview. We can deploy as a cloud service or on-prem. We started out as a cloud service, but we found that when you're, especially in the infrastructure services business, automating different changes throughout the infrastructure, a lot of our customers really wanted to see that happen on their prem rather than open up a tunnel to AWS, which is the cloud provider we service people out of. You can do either. We can do AWS or we can do on-prem. We run the same code base regardless. The reason that's pretty easy for us to do is that Pliant was built as a microservices architecture. So we run in containers on top of Kubernetes. We have the ability to do a couple things. One, be highly redundant. Two, be highly scalable. And these are really the four core parts. There are probably some more services than these, but these four core parts are what we would scale out. So the plugin repository in this upper right-hand corner, the green boxes stacked here, this is where all the integrations are. So we're importing, as I said, a couple manufacturers every 2 weeks. We're going through, we're taking their APIs, and we're making these really cool actionable drag and drop blocks. And that lives in the repository. The workflow editor is what you're going to see me work in today. So we drag and drop blocks around. We're going to see how that works. And when I get something I like, I press run. It goes to the real-time execution engine. And that's the guy that's going to make the API calls to go do the work that we've dragged and dropped blocks around to do. Any of these components are scalable or redundant via Kubernetes and our services. The real-time engine is the one that usually gets spun up. That's one where a typical instance will do about 3,500 API calls per second, and the real-time engine can then scale itself from there. So if I need more than 3,500 per second, I'm going to just spin another one and another one and another one. So if we have very dense, maybe I need to update thousands of things in parallel, we have the ability to scale that up. And lastly, the top right-hand corner, I don't want to forget about that guy, is our event processor. So we have inbound triggering as well. The most common you'll see today is ServiceNow is going to call a RESTful endpoint, which is the workflow that Pliant is going to run from the execution engine. But we also have the ability to take other inbound flows or inbound inputs and actually make something happen. I also want to point out that we talked about secure as in a password separation from workflow. We have role-based access that's granular all the way down to a single API call. And what I mean by that is, say that we're going to work with ServiceNow, but maybe I only want you to be able to list things in the CMDB, not actually change the CMDB. We have the ability to give that same user access to only the things that list and none of the things, the access API calls, action blocks, that would actually change something. Now, I can give them admin login to the little tag that I'm going to use. It can be admin login, but they're actually going to get only the blocks in their role-based access that they need to use. So we can really granularly control what you do inside any given workflow. I hope all that's making sense. If you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box when we'll grab them at the end, and I can go back to any point in the presentation and answer them. So I'm going to have 3 use cases I'm going to walk through live in the demo, but I wanted to paint a picture for you first. So the first use case, we're just going to sort of drag and drop some settings on the screen, and I'm going to use Pliant to get back a set of data from ServiceNow without actually writing any code. In the second one, we're gonna take the code that we wrote in the first one and use it to enhance a workflow that's already written a bit. But this workflow actually goes out to a number of Cisco CSR routers, and it grabs their name and their serial number, because that's what we really want to update in our CMDB. So we had some other process that updated our CMDB in ServiceNow. The one thing it didn't have were the serial numbers. And so we wrote this little workflow to go back, query the router, happened to be SNMP because that was the easiest way I could find to get the serial number out of the CSR. There are probably other ways. We just a little SNMP query. It comes back with just 2 pieces of data, the name of the router and its serial number, and then we're going to push those back into the CMDB. And then lastly, I'm going to show you a little more complicated workflow. This workflow actually allows us to choose a catalog item in ServiceNow. When we choose that catalog item in ServiceNow, we're going to make a RESTful call to Pliant. Pliant has a series of workflows that goes out, and it talks to info blocks, and I'm going to get an IP address. I'm going to talk to VMware, and I'm going to build a virtual machine. And I'm going to talk to our DNS or bind DNS server, and I'm going to register the IP address I got from info blocks that I configured on the virtual machine that I created in VMware. I'm going to register that with a name in bind such that we can ping that machine by name if we want to. So with that, I think I'm going to flip over to my live screen of the demo. I'm going to stop the sharing for a minute and then reshare. So this is the main interface for Pliant. The dashboard's pretty simple. It shows you the number of workflows we've executed in the last 24 hours, the number that have run in the last 5 minutes. And then I have a run 5 of the last 5 successful runs, workflows that ran, and the last 5 that failed. For any workflow we execute, we store a bunch of different information. We store the user, we store when the workflow started, when the workflow ended. We give you a UUID that you can index on for later. And we actually give you the results of whatever happened within the run. Pliant is not a logging engine. So we fully expect that our clients are going to take these messages and send them to the same logging system they use for all their other governance within the infrastructure. So that might be Splunk, Elasticsearch, whatever you might use. A typical Pliant machine will hold about 3 to 5 days worth of logs. These are here probably more so you can troubleshoot and see what's going on. It's not really meant as a reporting engine for long-term governance of what automation happened on what day, what time, and what the result was. So that's just to see that. So I'll move on with our use case. So we were going to build a couple of workflows. We have, these are some folders I've put different things into. I'm going to come into my my folder here, and I have this find IP address by name. I'm actually going to delete that, and we're going to recreate it together as part of our demo. So I'm going to say create and create a flow. And I'm introducing you now. I'm going to call this find IP address. Doesn't matter how I spell it, I guess, but by name. So I have my find IP address by name. And this is the UI that we use to build workflows. This is our drag and drop UI. We talk about low code because there are programmatic things you need to know how to do. You just don't need to know the syntactical languages of something like Pliant or Node.js, JavaScript, whatever, however you may say it. So what we're going to do in this workflow is we're going to ask ServiceNow to give us the IP addresses for everything that begins with CSR. Those are my Cisco Cloud routers. Programmatically, I need a variable because I need to be able to ask the question. I also want to use this in my next workflow where I'm going to pass this information on. So I'm going to call this search name, and I'm going to make it an input and an output variable because we want to be able to see it and we want to use it later as well. So from here, I want to go and I want to find ServiceNow. So these are all the different manufacturers down the right side of my screen, all the different manufacturers we have. And I'm going to find ServiceNow. Click on ServiceNow. And you can see these are the different blocks that we've built from the APIs that we got from ServiceNow. So we took the ServiceNow API and we built these action blocks. And since I only want information, I'm going to use the get table. So I'm going to come down here to get table, and I'm just going to drag it on my screen. Now we need to know some pieces of information. Auth key. So this is where I was talking before. So somebody has given me this key to use to do things within ServiceNow. We need the table name, and we're going to use the default table, CMDB_CI, that comes with, and it's standard in most everybody's instance of ServiceNow. Your organization may have changed it, but a lot of times people just roll with that, and that's what we have. The other thing is you can see we have this little more here because there are more parameters that are possible within this query of get table. And the one we really want to use is we want to look for name because that's what we're searching, right? And then in the syntax of ServiceNow, we can use starts with, and I'm going to type CSR. So basically, this is a very simple query that says, I want to see all the information from devices whose name starts with CSR. So those happen to be the routers. I happen to know they're in there. In fact, as I can come over to my CSR, my instance of ServiceNow, I can filter here, CSR. And we're going to see that I have 4 routers in there right now. And we can see that none of them have an asset tag or serial number listed in here. So that's what we're trying to fill in. I mean, obviously we could go and type, but we're going to do this with a little drag and drop. So we're searching with CSR. One last thing I have to do programmatically, if I'd like to see the results on my screen, I check this as output. I need one more box, which we call an assign box. So this actually assigns you the output on your screen. We scroll down here and grab my assign box. And then what am I going to assign? Well, I instantiated this variable called search name. So I'm going to say values search name. And what do I really want to populate search name with? I want to populate it with the output of this action block. Now, right now it says A1, but you could actually go through and name these too. So we could get CSR if we want. So this becomes sort of self-documenting as you go through the different blocks. And so in a value, I'm going to do get search now, and I really want the result. So what I'm going to do now is hopefully without writing a line of code, I'm going to go search the ServiceNow, CMDB, and I'm going to find everything that starts with CSR. So if I save and run this, I've now programmatically found these devices. So we can see I have an array of 4 devices. I know this looks a little complex, but hang with me. Any one of these devices has a whole bunch of information out of the CMDB, right? So in this case, you can see that name is CSR. Also down here, we have an IP address. So the information we're ultimately looking for is, hey, I want a list of IPs that I'm going to go update with serial numbers. And that's the next workflow. But if we want to use this workflow to feed that workflow, I need just one more block because I want to grab that one variable IP address. So I'm going to use, and again, it's a little bit of programming, right? But I'm not writing code. In array, we have a whole bunch of different array things we can use. And I'm actually going to use an array map function. In my array map function, the input is really going to be the output of this block. We call it get CSR. So the input here is going to be get CSR dot result. And since that IP is just one level lower, I'll add another result in here. And the member I'm really looking for is, remember, IP address. So now that I have this block in place, I'm going to change this, right? So my search name now, instead of being that, I'm going to use A1 result, and we'll run this again. So I'll save it, I'll run it. And what we're going to see at the very bottom here is now we have a list of IP addresses. So that's what we're after. If we want to update those, in the use case, second use case, I'm going to go over to my update asset info workflow. And this workflow basically runs through each of the IP addresses we're going to feed it. It does an S&P get that gets those two pieces of information, the name and the asset tag or serial number. And then we update, we get the table, we run through, we match the devices in this loop. So we find the 3 devices that we want, and we go through and we either add the device if it's not there, but it is, or we patch the device with the asset tag serial number. Now, this flow would stand on its own because I actually hard-coded the list of IP addresses in there, or we can use the work that we just did to feed this. So we go into user, into demo, and we said, hey, I have this find IP addresses. We did this, right, before. And then in here, we can see that it's search name. And so down here, I'm going to actually call this block name now. I'm going to say that A7, search name. We're going to use that as our feed to actually update those routers. And so with that done, we're going to save. And we're going to run. And this is going to go through and programmatically determine if we have CSRs, which we know we do. And also, it's going to then go out and do the S&P query. And we can see here in our result, we have the updated asset tags for each of those IP addresses. And if we go into ServiceNow and we hit refresh, we can see now that we've added those to the asset tags. So again, a very limited set, but some easy to understand workflows as we drag and drop our way through getting something done. Now, obviously, we probably wouldn't do this for 4, but what if we had 100 or 400 or 1,000? What if we wanted to update a lot of different things? All of that's possible using this drag and drop technology. I know I'm at the almost the bottom of the hour, but I want to show you one more workflow, and that is this workflow we built inside of ServiceNow with a catalog. So we built a catalog entry called VMware Virtual Machine. And within ServiceNow, as you know, probably, there are different workflows that you can go through to automate the process of acquiring something. And so we built this workflow that basically lets us choose between 3 different sizes of virtual machine. I can have a large one, has 4 gig of RAM and 80 gig of disk. I can have a medium one, or I can have a small one. If I click on one of these guys, it takes me to one more workflow, and I can choose my OS. So I can do the CentOS, or I can do Ubuntu, whichever I want to do. It also allows me to choose the subnet that this would go on. And I know there are people out there saying, oh, I would never let my users choose this, that, or the other. This is simply a demo. A lot of times that you would probably have some a form that's a little larger than just size, right? You would say, hey, I want it to be this, that, or the other. And then I can specify my host name. I usually do delete me because I have to clean these up later, whatever I want to make it. And so a couple of things here. This drop-down list is populated from a query we ran to VMware. This drop-down list is actually part of a routine where we go to info blocks and we ask which subnets are available. The other part of this routine that you won't see in the background is we actually ask info blocks to give us the next available address in 201 in this case. And then lastly, we go and we update bind with delete me332.pliant.xyz. So I'm going to actually run this. Order now. Sometimes there would be approvals in a lot of people's workflows. You know, it might go email to your manager, can I have this? Or maybe to the VMware team to say, you know, is there resources, things like that. There's a lot of automation that could go on. But we created this request ID. And if I clicked on the request ID and I move through to the actual request ID, we can see here that it was started. Work is in progress. We've updated bind. And we've actually allocated 192.168.201 to the VM. And its work is in progress. If I come over to VMware and I update this guy, we will see if it doesn't log out on me. We'll actually see that the creation is in process. And then we come back over here and we'll see that it's actually built just that quick. So it's all done. And the ticket is closed out. So that's this third use case where we're actually talking to multiple infrastructure systems in a set of logic to run. That workflow, I didn't really show that to you. That workflow looks a whole lot like this. If I come over to my ServiceNow, that's actually what happens is we call a RESTful endpoint from ServiceNow. I meant to point out too that each of our workflows, when you build them, becomes its own RESTful endpoint. So you can actually, we generate it down here, you can actually pull the RESTful endpoint or the curl statement from right here and run it from outside of Pliant, which is what we did to actually kick off the workflow to build this. So we've gone in and we actually, this reaches out to info blocks. This is our bind update. These are all workflows we called, like the one that I called in the other workflow. And then we patch the table and we give it an IP address. So we basically go back and update ServiceNow with the different things that we built. We're building the virtual machine with X number of CPUs that we chose from there. And we finish off by updating the table with the machine's ID, his IP address, and everything else. You can reach us at, I'm Dave at Pliant.io, or you can hit hello@Pliant.io. I'd be glad to give further demos. We do have a YouTube channel, so you can go watch other videos that we've produced. You can find us on the web at Pliant.io, a bunch of different stuff in our resource library. So I really appreciate everybody's time today. And again, thank you.